Thank you everyone for joining us today. I think we are finally ready to start. So good afternoon everyone. Thank you for joining us at the book launch of Not Without Us, Perspectives on Disability and Inclusion in Singapore. I'm Jennifer from Ethos Books and my pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a green headscarf, a yellow top and long black pants, and I'll be your host for today. So first I would like to give a gentle reminder for everyone to wear masks at the venue today, so that we can reduce the health risk for our immunocompromised friends in the audience. I also like to note that we have Nick, who is our photographer. He's wearing a grey blazer. He'll be taking photos at the venue today. If you prefer not to have your photo posted on social media, do let him know after the event, okay? So let me begin by giving thanks to those who make this event possible, to the team at NLB for hosting us at this amazing venue and for the tech support, to Eco Dreams for providing sign language and speech-to-text interpretation for our guests here and online, and for the editors and contributors with us today as well as online, right? Because you are what make the book possible. So I would like to introduce the panelists for today as well as their interpreters. So from your left, we have contributor Alvan Yap. Alvan has been an educator, writer, and editor for almost 20 years. He was a special education teacher and playwright of the play Not in My Lifetime, a play about special education in Singapore. Alvan has worked as an advocate with the Disabled People's Association and is currently in a management role with a social service agency. Next to Alvan is Nurul Fadiah Johari. Fadiah is a researcher and she has written pieces in publications such as Perempuan, Muslim Women in Singapore Speak Out, Growing Up Perempuan, Budi Critic, and The White Book. She is interested in examining the intersecting problems of patriarchy, capitalism, and racism, and their implications on mental health and trauma, especially in the lived experiences of minority women. So Alvan and Fadiah's interpreter is Azam. So you can see him standing on stage here. So next to Fadiah is our panelist Jocelyn Tay. So Jocelyn is an autistic undergraduate student of history at Nanyang Technological University. Her main area of interest is disability history and the disability movement, with a focus on neurodiversity and neurodivergence. She is currently working to advocate for disability and neurodivergent rights in Singapore, as well as highlighting disabled perspectives within Singapore history. Next to Jocelyn is co-editor of the book, Meng Ee. So Meng Ee is Associate Prof at the Psychology and Child and Human Development Academic Group at NIE. He researches and teaches in special and inclusive education, assistive technology, disability studies, and teacher education across diploma and postgraduate courses. In 2019, he was appointed chairman of the Gold Chok Tong Enable Fund. So Meng Ee will be our moderator for the panel today. What will happen is we'll have quick opening remarks by the editors of the book, followed by the panel conversation until 3:30, and then from 3:30 to 4 p.m., we'll have our Q&A. So together with Meng Ee, I'm happy to share that Victor Zhuang, another editor of the book, is also with us on Zoom. So maybe we can bring him up on Zoom now. And the third editor for the book, Dan Goodley, unfortunately got a punctured tire on his way traveling from Ipoh to Penang this morning, so he's not able to join us. But we have Victor with us today. So let me just mention that Jocelyn and Meng Ee's interpreters is Clara, who is standing next to Azam on stage. Yeah. So let me introduce Victor and then let Victor start the opening remarks. So Kwang Song Victor Zhuang is Fung Global Fellow at the Princeton Institute of International and Regional Studies, Princeton University, and International Postdoctoral Scholar at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information. His research lies at the intersection of communications, media and cultural studies and disability studies, especially as it pertains to the workings of technology and inclusion. He hopes to use his research to contribute to current debates about how inclusion happens both in Singapore and around the world. So I'll pass the time on to Victor now. So there's a lag, so yeah, give him some time to respond.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I think it's working now. I can hear the audio through Zoom, and that's working well. So good afternoon, everyone. It's actually 1 8:35 a.m. here for me. So my name is Victor. I'm one of the co-editors of Not Without Us. So I'm actually dressed in my pajamas. My hair is in a mess, but I'm really delighted to be calling in from Princeton to be part of this very important launch. I'll keep my introduction short and use it as a way to thank all the important people who have made the book happen. My co-editors, Meng Ee and Dan, two very supportive collaborators and mentors who have done it with this volume from inception to birth. Of course, Dan unfortunately can't be here with us today, but I know that he'll be here with us in spirit. All the chapter contributors, I see some of you here, or rather I've been told that some of you are here, which is great. You have gracefully given your time and your labor, trusting the editors, right, to do this and journeying with us. This volume couldn't have happened without all of you. The team at Ethos, who was not only keen to publish Not Without Us, but also believe in us when we first told them about this project close to 3 years ago, and who put up this very fabulous launch event. And of course, all of you here at the launch, thank you for being a part of this. I hope you will enjoy the book and the panel discussion today.
Okay, so over to Meng Ee.
Thanks so much. Well, firstly, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very beautiful setup and opportunity to have this official book launch. It's really great to be here. I echo Victor for what he has just mentioned. And as well as Dan, the last time I communicated with him, he was stuck on Penang Bridge, so I hope he has moved a little further. In any case, we're really excited to be here, to be launching this book. It has been a long time coming, and really excited that this has been the birth of this book today. I want to thank Victor as one of the very key editors who has really pulled us all together alongside Dan. I really want to thank all the contributors. This is really the fruits of the labor, and I think this sets the foundations, right, of disability studies. So I'm really appreciative and excited that we have so many people step out of their comfort zones. And I think as I read the chapters, I also feel that this is a very opening up of self, right, and being vulnerable to in many instances. So I really appreciate the opening up of self from all the contributors to make this volume possible. I think it's going to be very exciting where this is going to lead to, so looking forward to that. I want to thank also Ethos for believing in this project and for supporting us throughout the process. Thank you so much. And finally also to all the different team members here in making this session very much accessible to all of our audience. So thank you again, Ethos, and in making those preparations ready for all of us. Thank you. So I think, Jennifer, do I just head into it, or
Let me. I just have a quick reminder.
Okay, so sorry.
No problem. So just a quick reminder for the audience. So we'll be beginning our panel discussion now. Thank you to Victor and Meng Ee for the quick opening remarks. So during the panel, you can ask questions on the Facebook live stream for those online, as well as on Slido. So we have a QR code to scan. If you would like to scan, please raise your hand, and my colleagues will be there to help you, scan the QR code. If not, those at the part of us can also ask questions later on in person, right? But, during panel, maybe you have some burning questions you quickly want to ask them. You can first type them down in Slido. So up to you. So, I think that is all for the housekeeping. I'm really looking forward to the panel. So, Meng Ee, over to you and the panel. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer earlier on reminded me that I should maybe give just a very brief description. So I'm wearing a black shirt, and I've got an earpiece in my ear. And for those of you wondering why that is so, I use a screen reader because I I'm visually impaired. I cannot see my computer, and I rely on the screen reader to be reading to me. Okay, so just in case you're wondering, why do I have an earpiece? Okay, so really want to turn the attention now to our three panelists, and thank you again for agreeing to come and share. Perhaps a good start point is really to get you to each of you, if I can invite each of you to talk a little bit and give us a bit of a summary of the chapter that you had contributed to, and what inspired you to write that. And perhaps I can invite Jocelyn to kick us off.
Thank you, Meng Ee. So before I kind of get into it, I'll just give a description of myself as well. I'm wearing a dark blue blazer over a dark grey shirt. Now, with regard to my chapter is a discussion about the experience of meritocracy in Singapore from the perspective of neurodivergence. It's based on the question of how we have constructed our image of society and the people living in it, as well as the unfortunate biases that are built into the systems we experience. It examines the intersection of class, disability, and neurodivergence that occurs within the systems of meritocracy. It is a repudiation of the concept that any person, regardless of disability or class, should be stripped down to their value in capital and the rights afforded to them based on that value. This chapter was inspired by my experiences as an autistic neurodivergent student. Now, I acknowledge that my position is one of privilege. I was lucky enough to receive therapy, and lucky enough that I appeared smart enough to fit into the technocratic mold. Yet those things didn't really give immunity to the underlying issues of surviving the Singaporean education system. I still got bullied for stimming, in my case chewing my pens, and while teachers did intervene and provide support, I always felt that those protections were conditional on success. And not just any success, mind you, but following a neurotypical model of success, modeling myself as tolerable to wider society in spite of my eccentricities. Now, masking in this way, as any neurodivergent person can tell you, is exhausting. It's like trying to put on a perfectly scripted performance, a mask placed so perfectly that it could be mistaken for your face. It's stuffing all of your sensory issues under a lid, all the pain and irritation just bottled up until you get home and collapse. It eats at you. The most damning part of it all, and what I was tricked into believing for a long time, was the lie that the suffering was my fault. Meritocracy sells the idea that you're responsible for yourself, that the only thing limiting you is your hard work to build on and sell your talents. If you fail, it's not because you were pushed beyond any reasonable limit, it's because you clearly didn't work hard enough. It completely paves over the idea that some people don't fit into standard conceptions of merit or will trip over institutional stumbling blocks. I loathed myself for a long time because I thought if I failed even once, I would have no place. I wrote this chapter in response to those experiences of pain. I wrote it to put a spotlight on the root of the problem, that being the systemic attempt to put an economic value on people, making their dignity as a person contingent on how well they can dance for a non-disabled neurotypical society. I know that because of my position of privilege, I do not have the experiences of intersection between economic class and neurodivergence, that which exists at the core of meritocracy as an issue. However, I still believe it's important to point out that intersection for other neurodivergent people, and so that we might consider a more inclusive society.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. I must say that your chapter does resound, connects with me quite a lot because of my interest in that topic too. But we will dive a little bit more into it afterwards. Maybe I can ask the same question about what inspired you, Fadiah, with your chapter.
Thank you, Meng Ee. Yeah, just to describe what I'm wearing right now, I'm wearing a silver headscarf as well as a black dress and beige pants. Yeah, so basically, I think the journey into writing this chapter began about a few years ago in 2017 to 2018. I was really trying to make sense and make meaning of my own mental health is one, but it's also my experiences accessing psychiatry as a service user. And I was just trying to make sense of why I had a lot of difficult emotions while getting help, supposedly trying to get help and trying to get better. And so I wrote an earlier piece in a SPORES journal in 2018. And so after a few years, this chapter came out as a way to go further in this sort of meaning-making journey. So my chapter actually tries to critically address some of the dominant narratives in contemporary mental health discourse. I wanted to question some of the dominant ideas of recovery, and which I personally see as a way of gaining alignment to mainstream neoliberal capitalist society, and how the idea of recovery is often pushed as an individual responsibility. So if you are someone who has mental health issues, you are supposed to go for treatment, you are supposed to get help, and you need to get better. So the narrative is always trying to recover. So I wanted to question a bit more what recovery meant based on my own sort of reflections of my own personal experiences. And I feel a lot of these narratives that we see out there, that's being pushed out there, do not regard how social contexts and structures and ideologies also have a crucial role in perpetuating mental illness. Yeah. So instead, what we get out there when we talk about mental health issues is often the language of disease and pathology. And this is widespread, where when we talk about mental illness, it's always equated to it being like a disease, and therefore we need to seek treatment and then recover, as though recovery is a kind of linear sort of process, when I believe, as someone who has been trying to quote-unquote get better, it's not so linear, it's actually very complex. So I wanted to explore a bit more of that based on my experiences as a psychiatric service user, and question some of the institutional assumptions about mental health and recovery. I also feel like the current efforts to boost mental health support is very important, but at the same time, I feel like sometimes it takes a lot of power away from people who are actually struggling and the service users themselves. Yeah. This piece is kind of like two parts. So the first part was trying to examine some of these dominant narratives, and then the second part is actually a call for change by advocating for more grounds-up and community-based approaches towards mental health care, beyond, sort of institutionalized forms of care. Yeah, and so that's why I shared about my personal experiences in peer support spaces. I feel like community and peer support spaces are so important as a way to address some of the gaps in the current kind of systems that we have for mental health, and is to shift the power of narrative building and the voices back to service users as they themselves seek to define what mental health and recovery means to them. I think the narratives of and insights of psychiatric users and survivors are important as part of our collective knowledge building about mental health, and to basically foster greater inclusivity beyond the dictates of professionals. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I must say that before reading your chapter, I had very little insights into mental health, and I think you really brought on a very refreshing perspective on that. So I look forward to learning more and for us to grow in that space. Alvan, can I turn to you next to share a little bit about what inspired you in writing your chapter, and if you can just also give us a bit of a summary with your chapter.
Alvan speaking. I have short hair, I wear glasses and hearing aids. I have on the grey tee, a blue jacket, jeans and red shoes. Okay, I have had the privilege of being involved in the performing arts and theatre field for a couple of years. And before that, I was also working as an editor and writer with a publishing house, which happens to be Ethos Books. So I'm looking at some of my former colleagues here. What made me inspired me to write a chapter? I think, to be frank, the co-editor, Victor Zhuang, whom we met just now, had chased and nagged me for quite some time to contribute something. Okay, anyway, because of my past experience and participation in the performing arts, specifically, I was a playwright. Okay, for a play on special education, which has direct links to disability community, as well as a so-called the first fully accessible play in Singapore. So I felt it was timely to share my experiences and what I've learned, as well as my observations of the disability arts scene in Singapore. The title of my chapter is "And Suddenly We Appear." It's a play on the word, on the title of another another play, which was the first disability-led production called "And Suddenly We Disappear." So from the title alone, I'm sure you can there is a hint of what I was trying to convey. And suddenly we appear. Is that so? I was giving some background and context as to how the disability arts field in Singapore has developed its beginnings and what is happening now, and my hopes for its future development and further growth. So that's basically what my chapter is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvan, for giving us a brief look into your chapter, and also how disability art scene might be moving in the future. Okay, so I want to move on to the next question. I think one of the main objectives of the book, Not Without Us, is really to move away from how disability is understood, right? In primarily very charity-based, very medical-based, and to move into a space where we can see how disability can be understood in a what I have here is a generative source of knowledge and embodiment. So without going into too much description, I think maybe a simple way to understand that is how has disability become a source of strength and empowerment through writing and through your experiences. So perhaps in doing so, I can ask the panelists again, through your own experience growing up or living with disability, how have you seen your own experiences shift and changed, or in seeing disability as we would normally see, perhaps as something that is disparaging, something that is seen as compromised, and so on. And how has that journey for you, how has being involved with this writing and probably spending time reflecting and making meaning, right? I think making meaning of your own personal experiences. Perhaps you can share a little bit about that journey with the audience. And may I start with Alvan first in this next question.
Okay, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. That was 30 to 40 years ago. At the time, disability was something very much a stigma, very much invisible. I mean really invisible. Even wheelchair users, which are very visible, you could hardly see them back then out in public. You don't see them at all. Then much less the so-called invisible disabilities such as autism, mental health issues, deafness. So from then until now, of course, there have been a lot of changes, a lot of improvements. Nowadays, you can see wheelchair users everywhere, even on the public transport. We have much more knowledge of disabilities like autism, deafness, visual impairment, even maybe people with intellectual disabilities as well. I mean, the publicity is out there. There are campaigns, there are various schemes, and I think the stigma, and I think we all know someone who knows someone, friends or friends' friends, or even your own family members who have disabilities. So in that sense, I think attitudes have improved. People are now more accepting, more open, but there's always a but. Okay, I think on a scale of 1 to 10, say, okay, back then during my time, 30, 40 years ago, maybe it was a 2 or 1 or 2 on a scale of 1 is terrible and 10 is very good. Okay, 1 to 2 back then, and now maybe it's 4 or 5. Improvement, but there's still a long way to go. There are still so many barriers, misconceptions, misunderstandings of people with disabilities among the general public. Even if your family member has a disability, sometimes you don't really engage or understand their condition that well, because the stigma is still there. So as for how this has impacted on my own work and how my own writing, public speaking, my own disability has impacted on these areas, I would say I'm a very average person, so very Singaporean in other words. So I was always very unwilling or very afraid to speak up or to speak out. But I feel that one factor was because back then there was so little awareness or knowledge of disabilities in general, even for myself. Okay, I was the only student with hearing loss in primary school. Or so I thought. Until many years later, I met someone in the deaf community, and she told me, I was also in that school. I was 2 years or senior, but there was no opportunities to get to know people who have same conditions as you, especially if it's invisible disability. So, but I think as I grew older and I become have more opportunities to be exposed to the larger world, I think I have the opportunity to meet people with in the deaf community who have undergone similar experience as me. I slowly started to find my voice. In other words, I asked myself if I'm able to, why not? In terms of raising awareness, in terms of talking about my own deafness. Okay, I'm sure Jocelyn and Fadiah and even Professor Wong will tell you, having a disability is not easy. Growing up, all the struggles, all the barriers you have to face, all the misunderstandings. So, and I would say it takes a certain degree of courage to share it openly. Yeah, to tell others, all these difficulties we face. And of course, there's always an element of shame as well. You know, we are not normal. Yeah, we are not part of mainstream society. So, in this sense, I feel that having this kind of having the ability to actually express ourselves through our writing through our or other means is something that I feel that because of my own background experiences, I think it actually spurred me to do something more. Yeah. I can say things like it. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alvan. So similarly, can I ask Fadiah also to share a little bit of how, in writing the book, writing the chapter, how has, and reflecting on your own journey, how has things changed for you?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, looking back, I think I internalized a lot of the negative stigma surrounding mental health and help seeking. So I didn't quite take mental health seriously when I was younger, because I think generally the kind of environment I was in was not very supportive or understanding of mental health struggles. So oftentimes mental health struggles are dismissed as, you're thinking too much, or you're being too sensitive, or you just have to be strong, I think even when I first had my onset, my first episode in 2014, it was very hard for me to accept the idea that I was unwell or ill. So I was, basically I was hospitalized without my consent, because I wasn't in the state to give consent. I was basically not in the functioning state of mind. I wasn't able to eat and sleep and drink, and so I was basically not functioning, and I was hospitalized without my consent. And I did share in my chapter as well that I was also restrained, and which is something that I'm very against, because I don't think anyone should be forcibly restrained when they're going through very intense mental distress. So when I was told that I was ill, I didn't agree. I felt that I was going through a very intense emotional and spiritual upheaval, but it wasn't really a kind of illness. I didn't think I was a sick person. And then when I said I'm not ill, I think the doctors told me that I was confused. So I think that sort of kicked me into this journey of like, okay, why is it that I feel this way about myself, but other people are telling me that I'm sick, and my whole family was telling me that I'm sick. So I realized that later, after many, many months, several years of thinking about the condition, I feel like maybe illness is just a way to describe someone who is going through distress. Maybe illness is not just something within myself, but it's also within my environment, which includes social environment, the things that I was doing, or things that happened to me. So I think it took me a while to realize that maybe I had some trauma issues, which is why I had a few breakdowns in the past few years. I think only after a few years of seeking treatment that I started being more open to talk about my personal struggles, and writing has been that process for me to really make meaning of this experience, because never once did I pathologize or treat my condition as a kind of disease. It's rather a struggle, but it's also a condition that I live with. But it's not a disease, and I'm quite, I speak quite strongly about, being against treating people's like very legitimate struggles or madness as a kind of disease, because I do believe that historically and culturally, madness is seen as a very normal and human condition, as a kind of manifestation of trauma or stress. So I'm hoping that in this experience of writing, I do hope that other people can feel comfortable to talk or write about their own experience as well, especially if they feel like how they feel internally about their own experience may not necessarily agree with what professionals are saying.
Thank you, Fadiah. I think there's a lot to be learned there with your experiences. Okay, maybe I'll turn over the time to Jocelyn also to share a little bit about how this ability has it been a source of strength and knowledge for you now.
Thank you, Meng Ee. Right. So actually, as I kind of talked a little bit earlier about my experiences being autistic. When I was younger, I kind of experienced a lot of ostracization. I have distinct memories of being bullied by my classmates in primary school, such as having my property thrown away, or even my thumb twisted when I bit my nails. And even after I got a proper diagnosis, the relation between bullying and my autism didn't really register. I just thought I was that getting picked on was a part of life. It wasn't until I grew older and I looked back and realized that there was a lack of proper information distributed about autistic students, and that what I experienced was a form of ableism. And well, today I appear to experience the opposite. When I explain to people that I'm autistic, one of the most common things that I hear is that I don't look autistic, which feels patronizing. Like autism is something that is visibly alien, or that what I have experienced doesn't exist because it's not autistic enough. It might be the fact that I'm now a university student. It might be because I'm neurodivergent in acceptable ways. It's still an attitude that considers neurodivergent separate and alien, or accepted on a very exclusive basis. And I think it's that experience of ableism that kind of influenced my writing and kind of made me aware of this. Aware of these kind of structural problems that influenced my work. Now, in terms of my experience of disability as a source of knowledge, I think my perspective as an autistic person offers a different perspective. I do things a little differently, and it does kind of provide me new ways of looking at my work. There's creative solutions. There's kind of different ways of looking at sources in order to write and create things that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Unfortunately, this in conjunction with the experience of ableism also kind of makes me quite aware of how this kind of sources of knowledge may be delegitimized or deprioritized when it's those kind of diverse experiences of disability that are so important and so useful in many ways. If I could share a kind of a personal anecdote in the process of actually writing this book. I wanted to conduct oral interviews with other neurodivergent people as part of this project to get a sense of how other people experience these institutions, the kind of situations that they have to deal with, and the solution they came up with. When I brought this idea to my ethics board, the recommendation that they provided to me was to obtain consent, not from the neurodivergent people themselves, but from their parents and guardians. I should note that the neurodivergent people that I wanted to talk to were 21 years and older. A bunch of consenting neurodivergent adults treated like children on a field trip by academia. Like, can you believe it? I feel that that was a highly infantilizing perspective, and it's one of those things that kind of made me particularly aware of this form of institutional ableism that kind of deprioritizes disability as a source of knowledge. I still believe that the disability in the sort of creative and diverse solutions that it provides this unique perspective is valuable and should be considered a legitimate source of knowledge, which is why I think there needs to be kind of creative priority put to disabled people speaking out.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Actually, you raise a very interesting point about seeking consent, and in this case, you are saying getting the neurodivergent individuals having to get consent from parents. Those of us who have been have the experience of, well, I was going to say unfortunate experience of having to deal with IRBs and ethics boards will know how challenging these boards can be. But I was going to say that I think the setup for these boards, these ethics boards, is really to, I think the intention is to protect the vulnerable population. But you raise an interesting point here to say that I think there are certain populations who are quite able to make those decisions for themselves, in fact. So perhaps this is something that IRB boards would need to grow in time. But thank you for sharing that. Okay, I just want to move a little bit now and probably dive a little bit deeper into the chapters that have been written, and just to get a little bit more in depth with the writings. If I can just start with Alvan. I think your chapter makes a distinction between disability-led art by practitioners as opposed to what mainstream art is trying to advocate for, and that is greater inclusivity and accessibility. Can I get you, Alvan, to maybe share a little bit and what the difference might be there? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I wish to say that I don't really distinguish between mainstream arts and disability art. To me, art is art. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about when we talk about disability art? Okay, very simple. It is art created by disabled artists or led by disabled artists. Okay, and then but the challenge here, I think the key issue here is when you think of disability arts. Okay, or maybe just throw the question out to the audience. If we talk about disability art, okay, what is your reaction or perception? Maybe you think, is there such a thing? Or you think of shelter workshops, or for disabled people making arts and crafts, or art therapy, or rehab services which involve the arts, right? So these are, this may be what you think of when you think about disabled people and the arts. But in my chapter, in my essay, I'm referring more to the fact that there are disabled people out there making art in the sense that, whether it's literature, whether it's stage production, plays, musicals, whether it's performing arts like singing, acting, or other forms of art as well. In other words, it's exactly the same as mainstream arts. Yeah, what you see in exhibitions, what you see in productions by the major theatre companies, and so on. Okay, but of course, this is a bit more rare, right? First of all, there's this perception that there is only a limited number of roles disabled people can play. For example, on TV or for theatre. Okay, just imagine. So, for example, if you are a wheelchair user, okay, so you think if there's a role for you on TV, you must be a wheelchair user, right? But so the barrier may be people think. So there must be some backstory to explain why this character is in the wheelchair. Additional work, okay. But my thinking is more, why do we even need to explain or give the backstory? This person may be a mother, an uncle, or a child in the wheelchair, full stop. Yeah, then continue with the main plot of the story. Okay. So so in this sense, I would say that this is one aspect of disabled person who is involved or who makes a living in the arts. Okay, just give them the opportunity and disregard their disability, judge them on their their skills, their talent, and all that. Okay. Then the other aspect is of course more that there are disability arts productions which directly is inspired or comes from the fact that the artists create their works inspired by their disability. Yeah, that means they are sharing their life stories, for example, or maybe not even their life stories, but stories based on their disability or in some way related to their disability. I think we all have watched movies, okay, in which the main characters have disability and the entire plot is focused on the fact that, this person is blind or this person has physical disability. I think there are some famous examples. I think many of you maybe have watched movies like Rain Man, My Left Foot, Hollywood movies. Okay, right. And these are even win Oscars and so on. Okay, so but of course the issue with all these productions is they are the roles are played by non-disabled people. They are script writers, everything, directors, everyone is non-disabled. So in terms of disability arts, what comes to mind is more of why not have short stories told or produced or aired directly by the people who know the story best. It means the disabled artist, the disabled script writer, the disabled producer themselves. So that's what I feel what disability arts mean in another sense. So actually there's a wide spectrum now when you talk about disability arts. It can be something like my disability is irrelevant. I want to be a performer, I want to be a writer. Or it can be my disability is directly relevant to my play or my book, or my musical. It's inspired by all this, my lived experience as a disabled person. So that is also disability arts. So when it comes to that, do you think there's a difference between disability art and mainstream art? I don't think so, because mainstream art, you remember, mainstream artists or non-disabled artists, they are also inspired by their life experiences. Yeah, right. They have their own struggles, they have their own issues as well. Yeah, so some of them bring that to their stage, to the screen, or in their writing, or in their dance production, and so on and so forth. It's the same, maybe not exactly the same, but it's similar, right? So that's why I say, for me, there is no real distinction. Art is art, but of course, for disabled artists, we face tougher and longer and more challenging obstacle course to get our foot in the door in the first place, in terms of funding, opportunities, and even the fact that in general, mainstream society doesn't give them much of a chance. It's only recently you get to see more and more disabled people up on in the movies, on TV, and so on, because more awareness, more opportunities. But of course, we still have a long way to go. And that's my take on the issue.
Thank you, Alvan. Actually, when you were talking about building a back-end story to explain, yeah, I think I fully agree with you. I couldn't help, as you were describing having maybe able-bodied actors play disabled persons, and the one movie that comes to my mind, Scent of a Woman. Those of you who have seen that movie, Al Pacino, famous actor, plays a blind person. And I think what you're saying is, why can't we find a blind actor to do that? And if I take that a little bit even before, I don't know how young our audience is, but those of you who are young enough to remember Charlie Chan, who is supposed to be a Chinese police detective, I think quite a popular TV series in the 70s. Charlie Chan. It's an American series, but it's played by, so he's supposed to be Chinese, but he's played by an American, a white American. So of course they do a lot of heavy makeup and so on. So related to that, I suppose Bruce Lee, right? Bruce Lee, the famous martial artist, was trying to break into the Hollywood scene and not wanting to compromise himself as a genuine, legitimate Chinese actor, and he felt that he has a place in Hollywood, and of course he has left a legacy for others to stand on his shoulders. But interesting. Thank you, Alvan, for sharing that. If I can move on to Fadiah now for your chapter. You talk a little bit about the how mental health, right, is often pushed onto the individual, right? They have to somehow deal with that almost singularly. But I think you are presenting a different perspective in the sense that maybe some of these issues that drive people or places pressure on mental health could be a result on what you say, neoliberal and other neoliberal capitalists and other forms of oppressions. Maybe can you share a little bit with your ideas with how these different systemic factors kind of play on how do we mental health individual patients would experience that, and how do we better maybe frame it, or how do we better create those opportunities for well, if anything, just greater understanding between the health practitioners and individuals with mental health issues.
Well, I mean, as we see now, the kind of dominant narratives that we get surrounding mental health is often sort of reducing mental health as a personal and individual struggle rather than something that is experienced at the collective level. So even though we know that, for instance, in Singapore we have a lot of youths struggling with depression and anxiety, we do not talk of it as something to do with the way our society is, or some problems inherent in our society, but we talk about it as if it's personal struggles only. I mean, it is personal on one level, but it's actually beyond the personal as well. So I wanted to kind of talk about that in my piece. So oftentimes mental health struggles are taken out of their context. So we don't understand why people face anxiety, for example. So for instance, when I talk about structural problems, I mean, it's really the day-to-day sort of struggles that people face stemming from, for example, socioeconomic issues like poverty, people facing racism, for example, and how even, for example, when we talk about loneliness as being one of the key factors causing depression, we don't talk about loneliness as a structural or societal issue, but we talk about loneliness simply as a psycho-emotional issue, when actually loneliness, actually the condition of loneliness itself shows the kind of society that we are entrenched in. So for example, for people who are, for example, low-wage workers or people who are dealing with poverty and job insecurity, they are more likely to experience depression and anxiety because of the precarity of the life that they live. And so simply telling them that, oh, they need to get help, they need to go for treatment and therapy, it's not going to change the actual lived condition that they're facing. So what I'm saying is that while it's important to get help and therapy, it is also important to, when we speak about mental health, to go beyond just that. So I kind of want to see more discussion on mental health that are rooted in the lived and structural conditions of our society. So for example, if we talk about Singapore as a very neoliberal society, it means that we are a very competitive and individualistic society. And how does that have repercussions on like our education system, for example? How does this cause stress among students and young people? And then how does this create sense of loneliness and isolation, and then, you know, depression and anxiety that comes with it? Or we live in a society that's very intolerant or punitive of mistakes and failures. So like there's a lot of pressure for young people to do well in school, for example, such that, you know, if you don't do well in your exams, you know, we hear of stories of even primary school children being suicidal and some of them acting out on it. So these are very legitimate concerns, and it's something that needs to be addressed at a societal level rather than just the individual. So what I hope is that when we talk about mental health, it becomes more of a collective issue. Therefore, the kind of solutions or ways of addressing or supporting people in mental health is really communal and societal rather than just individual. Yeah.
Thank you. I think just on the issue of exams and the competitiveness in Singapore, I think many parents and I'm sure students would very much align with your call for that concern. But thank you for sharing those. Jocelyn, if I can turn to you now. You talk in your chapter about the media representation of neurodivergent individuals having to maybe conform, right, to some level of ableist kind of images and profiles. Can you share a little bit about why might this be troubling, and how should we better frame neurodivergent perspectives better? Thank you.
Thank you. So the core reason why these ideas are limiting is that they reduce neurodivergent people and really any person down to what they can contribute. It creates two boxes for people, those that produce capital and are therefore productive, and those that do not and are therefore a burden. In a manner that's very similar to the functioning labels, I'm sure you've kind of heard things like, say, high-functioning autistic or low-functioning severe, and so on and so forth. It suggests a certain hierarchy of disability, and that the rights of the individual are contingent on where they are on this hierarchy. The fact that these ideas of productivity are based in neurotypicality further limits the potential of neurodivergent people by ignoring alternative modes of expression and the diversity of experiences that we have to offer. And really, any disabled person, any neurodivergent person should be allowed to express their views as adults and people first without needing to prove themselves with half a dozen degrees, a resume, and looking normal enough. What I believe is needed, needed in the system is more neurodivergent voices that clearly represent their perspective and for our experiences to be respected. It's really quite simple of allowing the person with the experiences to talk about themselves. Even something as simple as respecting our choice of language. I shouldn't have to fight over being referred to as an autistic person rather than a person with autism. And while caretakers and families are very useful allies in advocating for neurodivergent rights and neurodivergent perspectives in the system, they should not be superseding the voices of neurodivergent people themselves. In this regard, I encourage neurodivergent people to write and talk of their perspective on the world so that we may be understood as people and not as human resources. I will acknowledge that not every neurodivergent person may be in the position to do so. They may not be comfortable identifying openly due to the possibility of jeopardizing employment or educational prospects. Discrimination due to one's neurodivergence is still something that happens today, which makes the act of speaking up that much more important to call out such systemic discrimination and the diversity that it excludes. In this regard, talking about neurodivergent self-advocacy, I want to highlight some of the work of other autistics, such as Wesley Loh. He's spoken up about the need for explicit legislative protections for autistics and neurodivergent people in areas such as healthcare insurance and employment. While our society is still in the process of including a more diverse range of neurodivergent perspectives on a fundamental level, these self-advocacy movements should be important and should be promoted. They forward neurodivergent rights on neurodivergent terms. And while we still need to renegotiate the system to remove these kind of ableist tendencies, these people who kind of speak the language, who play the game, are needed to ensure protections and rights for the people who live in it. And if we have to play the game, we may as well be represented by ourselves.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Thank you. We're running a little bit out of time, so I think it's a nice, maybe final question to the panelists. Just to understand what more can be done, right, in your respective areas that you have covered. So if I can just put the question to Alvan first. What do you anticipate and hope for inclusive arts in Singapore?
Okay, briefly, I would like to see more opportunities, more funding, okay, more programs for disabled people to actually participate in the arts beyond those therapy or rehab kind of structure. And I also hope the public, the community at large would be more receptive, okay, towards disabled artists and disability-led productions. It would also be good if we have more publicity, greater awareness as well. So, but I want to say here at this point, I'm actually very thankful that we have quite a number of mainstream arts organizations, data companies, and even arts institutions being very supportive in ensuring that productions are now more accessible and inclusive. That's an important first step. You don't expect disabled people to suddenly develop interest in the arts if they never had opportunity to attend a play in the first place, for example. Okay, so the first step is give them more access, discounted tickets, make sure the productions are accessible, we have captioning, they have audio descriptions, and so on and so forth. So that's my wish.
Thank you, Alvan. Fadiah, in your work, right, in your chapter, you talked a little bit about peer support circles as a way to maybe create a space, right, for individuals with mental health issues to be able to come together and be somewhat given that space to discuss those issues and to be affirmed. What other ways do you think, or how do we, can you elaborate on how can this be scaled up to psychiatric services in the community?
Yeah, I think peer support spaces function as a way to empower service users to sort of develop their own narratives and make sense of their own experiences. And also, at another level of advocacy is to call for better forms of care and services available. So I think one way is to, peer support spaces tend to be very closed and private, but people from these spaces can then, advocate. It could be like online, or it could be talking to their own doctors to say that, hey, I would like to see more of a certain kind of approach towards mental health care. And I think this should be done collectively rather than by the individual service users. So for example, I think I mentioned in my chapter that I think one area of concern, especially faced by people from minority ethnic groups, is facing racism, and that how that has repercussions on their mental health as well. So I think talking about this and raising awareness to professionals, which would mean that professionals would also then need to develop a keener lens or a kind of sensitivity towards racism, and how then they can better support people from minority communities in dealing with racism as a kind of as part of their mental health healing. Yeah, so it could be racism, it could be other forms of discrimination, it could be sexism, it could be homophobia, and so on and so forth. So I think for marginalized groups to then voice out on these issues and then to also articulate how or the kind of changes they want to see, I think that might help.
Thank you, Fadiah. And finally, maybe to Jocelyn, and this is a big ask here. Are we? How do we have a disability inclusive meritocratic Singapore? Is that possible, or is ableism and meritocracy and the neurodivergence, is that all too intertwined and difficult to disentangle for our society?
I think that in regard to that question, there are some fundamental problems with meritocracy. Like I've outlined earlier, the main problem with meritocracy is that no matter which way you try and slice it, it attempts to ascribe a quantifiable value to a human being. Now, in its best case, and a narrative that we see expounded a lot in Singaporean society, is the idea of compassionate meritocracy, the idea that those who are better assist those who are not. Yet, such a line of logic suggests that some people are worth less, be it for, say, their neurodivergence, their disability, or simply not conforming to standards of merit. It can be patronizing, and it does not afford dignity to those who receive that kind of assistance. At meritocracy's worst, we see the snarl of neoliberal logics that suggest stripping rights away from those who are worth less, such as dismantling welfare and support systems for those that do not conform. This all goes back to the logic of making people ideal to feed into the engines of society rather than asking what a society can do for the people who live in it. I believe that in this regard, we should stop considering meritocracy as an untouchable ideal. people shouldn't have to prove their right to exist by any metric. I believe that it might be best instead to work from the premise that all people are inherently valuable and are capable of various modes of contribution and move forward from there. Work towards addressing the needs of the people first and then allow them to work in their own way. Prosperity and success doesn't have to be a zero-sum game like meritocracy suggests, and it would be better for us to work together rather than against each other in the creation of such a society.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Those are big issues and very weighty issues for us to ponder over and to see how we can move those forward. Okay, I think because of time, and we want to allow some time for questions from the audience, we will probably stop the panel discussion at this point, and I think open the opportunity for some questions from the floor. So I think Jennifer's going to help me to do that. Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
So I think before that, maybe we can thank our panelists for the rich sharing and discussion. So thank you so much. Yes. So not over yet. So we still have about 15 minutes for our Q&A. So for now, what we will do is we'll first take some questions from Slido, maybe about 2 to 3 questions, and then after that, I'll open the floor to the people in the pod right now. So let's take the question on Slido, and after that, we'll move to the floor here. Okay? So Victor is joining us, still awake. Yep, he's still there. Okay, so let's see. Okay, while Erin is trying to toggle so that y'all can see Slido, but I have one question here which I thought I would like Victor and Meng Ee to answer first, the editors. So what was the most challenging thing about curating the chapters into a cohesive edited collection? So maybe Victor, you want to go first, then Meng Ee? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start first by sharing that I think ultimately for us, when the contributors came in with the abstracts and the sort of the first drafts of the chapters came in, I think ultimately it didn't really feel that hard for the form of the chapter to take place. I mean, what you see in the book, right? The 3 kind of sections are art and culture, policy, kind of orientation in the 3rd section, as well as disabled lived experiences. I think in a sense it naturally coalesced into those 3 categories, sort of. So I mean, they sort of speak for themselves. So it just happened that it fell into place, and yeah. Perhaps maybe just to also touch on the other point, the other question about what we hope to achieve with the publication of the book as well. I think that's a question also. And I think for me and Meng Ee, and Meng Ee can talk more about it later as well. I mean, Meng Ee and I have, and of course with Dan as well, we have always been, in a sense, partners in crime. I hope we can get caught or something like that. But always been talking about the possibility of creating space for disability studies, right? To think more critically around the condition of disability, around disabled experience, having scholarship that centers on disability, right? Treating disability as not simply the subject or object of study, but rather as the generative source of knowledge. And I think that's what we hope to achieve with this book. Hopefully, this book will begin sort of a new wave of scholarly work, of research, of both academic thinking, as well as, I think, public discourse around how we can think around disability and inclusion. Meng Ee?
Thank you. Hi, Victor. Good. You're still awake with us. Thanks so much. I think Victor is absolutely right. I think we had a good steady stream of contributors come in. I think as the chapters coming in, I think we were starting to get a little bit. We had a good problem on our hands in the sense that we had quite a number of chapters to select from. So I mean, in terms of difficulties, I think we had to kind of make a decision which ones we would ultimately put into the volume. And maybe I'm just leapfrogging a little bit ahead, and perhaps this is an indication that there may be a next book that might come in the time ahead, because there's definitely, I think, a lot of capable individuals out there with experiences. They want to write and share and talk about it. Victor's talked a little bit about what we envisage with the book. I think just serendipitously, Prof. Paul Tambai just talked to me and asked whether we have a disability studies in Singapore. We don't as yet have that, but perhaps this is a foundation that may lead to, who knows, right? This could lead to an opportunity for us to look into this with a bit more depth, that there is an interest in this field, and maybe we should start looking at it and how do we deepen that, and maybe making it into a course of study as well, right, to formalize that. Because I think at the moment disability studies is somewhat, at least for me, I'm embedding it as part of my teaching in special education, inclusive education, and so on. So perhaps in time to come, there could be an opportunity for this to be deepened in that space. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Victor and Meng Ee. So I think the next most popular question on Slido is this, for the whole panel, I think. So what challenges may be restricting this push to disability leadership or equal representation of disabled individuals? And how do you feel about the role of the government? Okay, let me repeat it again. What challenges may be restricting this push to disability leadership or restricting the equal representation of disabled individuals, right? And how do we feel about the role of the government? So anyone want to take a stab at it?
Yes, I believe I can kind of start first in this regard. So I think one of the main issues preventing kind of equal representation, at least when it comes to when it comes to neurodivergent advocacy, is having an equal share of voice. A lot of neurodivergent advocacy, particularly the area I particularly look at is autistic advocacy, is that for the most part there isn't really a particular leadership. I think for a lot of disability movements, you can't really pin a particular leader to these movements, mostly as a result of a lack of education, a lack of support support of disabled people being presented as leaders. For a long time, it wasn't believed that disabled people could lead, and as a result, it kind of fit into a feedback loop where now when we're attempting to try and make our voices heard, there aren't really many people trained to lead these particular movements. On top of that, at least when it comes to the autistic movement, our movements are quite disparate. Our needs are very different, and as a result, we don't really have a particular monolithic community that which would reduce our social leverage. I'm not saying that a monolithic community is the correct way to go about it. In fact, that the diversity of the community is part of its strength. But there needs to be a greater share of voice that is needed in order to obtain this equal representation. on top of that, when it comes to the problem of media representation, there's also a persistent problem of being misconstrued. Media institutions are kind of fundamentally non-disabled, fundamentally neurotypical, and as a result, there is a frequent misunderstanding of our understanding of our issues. A common thing I've heard is that of advocates getting frustrated with the slow pace of change, as well as the way that people are represented in areas such as newspapers and interviews. With regard to this, to the role of the government, I believe that part of this thing is to is to enable collaboration. One of the main ways that advocacy occurs due to the lack of kind of individual social leverage through lobbying, through this collaboration with state and organizational actors. And I think that this collaboration needs to occur on an equal standard. Neurodivergent people and disabled people shouldn't really be considered a tokenistic inclusion. They should be the focus and a kind of respected contributor in these particular collaboration. And I think that's actually an important part of increasing the legitimacy of disability representation in the current state of society.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And anyone else want to add on?
I'd like to add on and maybe follow up on what Jocelyn mentioned just now. I think one reason, that's my assumption, my perception, why organizations or the government may hesitate to truly include us, to give us equal representation, maybe because of the vested interest factor. I mean, you are directly involved. You have direct interest, vested interest in this area. So, can you be neutral? Can you be impartial? Can you make rational decisions without letting your emotions overwhelm you? Things like that. So I think that may be a factor. There are worries, because I have a direct stake in this. So I cannot be, fair. I cannot be neutral. Look at the objective facts and evidence and make decisions according to that. I let my emotions, my personal interests, overcome that. So that may be one of the perceptions from the organizations and authorities. So as to how to overcome that, I have no good answers. Just to say that everybody have some kind of personal interest and stake in anything we do right. So why treat us differently? After all, we know best. We are the experts in this particular area. So I hope for more than just putting us in for feedback or consultation sessions is not enough. We have to have a seat at the table in terms of making policies which affect us. We have to have a say and not just someone else record our words and send it upstairs into some black hole or some black vase. So that's my take on it.
I also have a point to make, I think, in relation to what has already been shared, which I agree very much with. Also, I think with regards to this issue of representation is the idea of who has the authoritative knowledge to speak on these issues. And oftentimes, if we talk about the role of the government, it's always giving a lot of power to the institutions and professionals who are trained in the field, and not so much looking at service users or people with disabilities as experts of their own experiences and also as equals in terms of knowledge production. So if we can move towards shifting that power back to people who are disabled and as well as people with disabilities as well as service users and so on, then I think we might make a step forward. But if not, then it's still very much a very top-down kind of approach.
Thank you. I think if I just add a couple of words here. Maybe the title of the book here comes again to light and comes to attention. Not without us, right? And I think that really sends that message that it's about disabled persons and any policies. If the government makes policies, I think it's very important that disabled people are there. I think Alvan said at the table, right? Not just through proxies or through studies and so forth. I think it really is about involving disabled persons throughout the whole gambit of how a society operates. I think there's a lot of representation in, say, social policy, welfare-related programs, but maybe that is a little bit lacking in the other aspects of how the whole operations of society, of nation building. But that also means then we need a lot of you, right, the disabled persons, to be involved, to be advocate, to continue the advocacy work, to be engaged, and to be part of that landscape. And I think it kind of points us back again, right, to I think the importance of bringing this whole discussion into the foreground, and how all the issues that we've just talked about and more, right, in the book, how can these issues be brought into the current debate and discussions. So it's I think for the government to have greater listening ear, and I think for the community of disabled persons to also to be seeking greater engagement from the government. Okay, thanks.
Hello? Okay, yeah. So we have quite a few questions on Slido, but I think I will give a chance to the people in the poll of us. Maybe we can take one question from someone in the audience here if you are keen to ask. So just to note, maybe it'll be good if you can just say your name if you want to ask a question. If you are a sign language user, you can come up also in front of, just stand here where I am if you'd like to ask your question, so that those at home can see your signing. Maybe we'll try to take one or two questions. Yeah. So anyone keen to ask a question? Okay, we have one in front here. Yes. So introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Noah, and my question is, what does publishing this book mean to you?
This book mean, what does publishing this book mean to you? Yeah, thank you. So maybe we can get the panel to answer then. Maybe Victor at the back. Yeah, but maybe starting with the panel, what does publishing this book mean to you?
I'd say that in terms of kind of putting this chapter, for putting my contribution forth in this book, it kind of does mean to me kind of this if first step into trying to advocate for this disability rights. I haven't really engaged with advocacy prior to this, but I kind of threw myself headfirst into disability studies, kind of learning about these various issues, and looking at my experiences in a new light. I think what publishing this work means to me in that regard is a kind of legitimation of those experiences, of the kind of work that I've done, as well as the potential for kind of for so much more to be done, both in advocacy and in the area of academics.
I think publishing this book has been very meaningful, personally, because it's very difficult to get my thoughts out there because it seems like I'm kind of going against the grain, going against what the doctors are saying, but I feel like thanks to the affirmation from the editors, it's nice to see that it's coming to fruition, and I'm able to kind of put myself out here to talk about this and have people listen to me, so it's actually quite nice.
It's the chance for us to tell our stories, share our experiences. I think everybody here has this feeling of, sometimes you want to tell people how you feel, okay, what's happening, and what we can all do together, or something we just, tell people, tell the world that we exist and this is us and what we stand for.
I think it's a coming together, right, of, I think in disability there's also a lot of diversity, but I think that diversity is, there are quite a number of common themes that that surfaces, and it's giving, I think, allowing that space, right, for us to express and to I think to express those challenges that we have experienced, and you know, reading those have been, I think, quite invigorating for those of us who understand those personal journeys of having been misunderstood in our youth or mistreated in our youth and so forth, discriminated, but I think somehow along the journey we have re-engaged and I think we come back to that generative source of knowledge and of embodiment, that we somehow, instead of disability being maybe that source of despair, it somehow can be empowering in some ways. As one of the editors, I think I really appreciate working with Victor and having Dan on board to find friends and professionals that I've managed to grow, to deepen our relationship. So for me, I think the opportunity to work with fine scholars have been a real privilege for me. Thank you. And maybe over to Victor.
Oh, Victor says he already answered. So maybe we have chance. We have time for one more question because it's already 3:59, right? Okay, so maybe we ask. Okay, so Slido or okay, the one who is joining us in the audience. Okay, we will pass it to the person in the audience. So this is the last question.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed your comments, and I wanted to ask, because a lot of the things that, you know, Fadiah and Jocelyn, you pointed to as concerns for communities with disabilities are that you know, analyzed and reflected on as being to do with capitalism or meritocracy and neoliberalism and these like broader kind of conditions that we live within. And so I guess what I'm curious to hear is then for you, what is your imagination and what are your commitments, is what it, in terms of what it looks like to participate in transforming those systems, right? Because disability justice activists and other contexts have often talked about how accessibility is not justice, because we don't just want access to horribly unequal systems, to participate a little bit more in a system that ultimately doesn't serve a lot of us, right? And that disability justice is more than, say, for example, the inclusion of students with disabilities in the current education system, but like Fadiah, you pointed out, so much of how the current education system exists doesn't serve all students, right? Because it is punitive and because it undermines your sense of self and worth and all of those things. So can disability, experiences of disability then be a route to our politicization and the ways in which we seek changes that don't just benefit or aren't just framed as things that benefit people with disabilities within existing systems, but seek to transform those systems in ways that benefit and liberate all of us, right? And like, for me, as someone with neurodivergence, it informs a lot of my political work, right? And so I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how, you know, you see connections between, say, the ways that, you know, systems of psychiatry restrain or incarcerate people in carceral systems, right? And how they, in fact, have an overrepresentation of people with disabilities too, and the many different ways that carceral logics that oppress people with disabilities also oppress so many other communities. And so then, what does it mean to say you're an activist or a person with disability fighting for these issues versus fighting for a more like cohesive kind of forms of liberation? Okay, sorry for a very long question.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Please forgive me. I'll kind of take some time answering it because it's quite comprehensive. I do think that there's a lot of intersectionality between the issues of disability and neurodivergence and these wider issues. As I pointed out, like say, there's class and neurodivergence. There's kind of race and mental health issues, and a lot of these things kind of come from institutions that kind of fundamentally misunderstand the problem. They do not kind of take into account these kind of oppressions that are baked into the system. I think in that regard, the advocacy and I think change in that regard does kind of have to reach down to quite a deep level. We need to kind of reassess what we think an ideal society is. Like, for example, when I kind of put forth my critique of meritocracy, I think we kind of like I'm going beyond saying that we want to aspire to a truly meritocratic society. To more, maybe meritocracy isn't necessarily the best idea to begin with, and I think this kind of goes towards a good number of these ideas that come from say non-disabled and privileged ways of thinking. Like for example, the idea of kind of like the strong helping the weak implies fundamentally that that some people are stronger than others, and so on and so forth. I think in that regard, inclusion has to be about pulling these people who have been historically marginalized from these systems in the process of remaking them. The first step is to first of all kind of give an equal platform, and platform one that is run by them, for them to tell their own stories, to be aware of these kind of like deep-rooted issues. And when we kind of work towards kind of overturning them, it has to be one that is kind of collaborative. I'm not saying that neurotypical people are our enemies. I'm not saying that we should kind of marginalize these people who don't have these experiences that we do, but that it should become more of a kind of a collaborative process in considering new transformative systems that kind of fundamentally overturn the system. I mean, perhaps it's quite scary to kind of think about a society that's kind of so fundamentally different, that kind of operates on the logics that are kind of different from what we're raised in. But perhaps it's not so bad to take that particular chance in that regard.
Thank you so much for your question, and I think you already sort of summed up. Thank you. You already summed up what both of us wanted to articulate in our own chapters, that all these struggles are intersectional. We are not just struggling for one cause, but actually when we struggle, for example, against incarceration, we're actually talking about abolition, right? We're talking about abolition of very punitive systems. Then we examine, what meritocracy means. Then how does this have repercussions on our education? Then how this leads into issues of labor, issues of other issues, migrant issues. So, as someone who talks about, I derive a lot of inspiration from the MET movements from other countries. I mean, it hasn't really happened in Singapore, but MET movements, critical MET studies, and so on. And it's about reclaiming that power. And so it's about abolish, and I think it comes together with abolitionist kind of movements. So like in the US, it goes with the movements of prison abolition, talking about the continuing effects of slavery and so on. So I do hope that as a start, this could, we could also not sort of copy exactly into the Singaporean or like the local context, but to draw inspiration from such movements and see how that could work into our own local environment. So like I really love the work that you do in transformative justice, and I think it relates to other forms of struggles against oppression, such as disability rights and anti-psychiatry as well. Yeah.
Okay, any last comments from Meng Ee? Meng Ee, would you like to close the panel?
If I can find the switch, yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I think this has been, just before it started, I asked Jocelyn and Fadiah how filled the room was, and they told me, we're about 75 to 80% of the room is filled. So that's fantastic. So excited to hear that so many of you chose to come on a Saturday afternoon to listen to this opportunity to have this book launch and listen to the panelists. I think this is a milestone, right, for disability content and work that is now being collected as a volume, and it's really exciting. I think the potential now is to see how this book impacts our society. I'm certainly going to be sharing it with my students, and those of you in the audience with family members and friends. We hope you do the same. So I think that's very much part of that advocacy work, right, that we just talked about, and how much more depth can we get into society in terms of raising the disability banner and getting that shared, not only within, as I said, the usual issues of welfare and social policies, but I think in 2023, as we march on into the next, maybe into what we had SG50, SG100, can we become a lot more inclusive and disability doesn't become so much of as a unique topic of conversation, but very much part of the general conversation. I think that is, I think this is the beginnings of how we would like to see that dialogue deepen and further developed here in Singapore. So thank you so much to everyone for being here, to Alvan, to Fadiah, and to Jocelyn for really sharing. And as I said in my opening, I think so much of the sharings have been very vulnerable, right? Opening ourselves up to that vulnerability. And we really appreciate that openness and that willingness to make ourselves vulnerable. But I think in that sharing, in that bold step and that preparedness to be vulnerable is where we also find, I think, solutions and ways to move forward and step forward in to deepen the disability campaign, as it were, right, as we move forward. So I really appreciate everyone being here and look forward to continuing this conversation and deepening our network here and beyond. I think Ethos has a few. I think you already have some packages set up, right, Jennifer and team, in how this can be, these topics here can be furthered as book club topics and so forth. So I think Ethos would have all these put in place. I want to thank, of course, Dan, Prof. Dan Goodley, who is unfortunately not able to be with us. I hope his car troubles have been resolved and he's safely in Penang now. Victor, thanks so much always. Miss you in Singapore, but look forward to continuing our conversations wherever you are in the world. Okay. I think you might have, I don't know whether you're still there, but if you are, thanks so much for staying up, and I think good night to you and the family. Okay. So thanks so much. And Jennifer, I think over to you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we can just give a round of applause to the panel. Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think I have really taken a lot away from this conversation. I really agree with how we have to move away from disability as a unique topic to something that's general. How do we continue creating conversations? So I think it's very important to affirm here that Ethos Books remains committed to improving the accessibility of our events, from providing live note-taking, captioning, and recording our events, to enlisting the services of professionals like Eco Dreams, which I would like to recognize now, So today was our biggest book launch in recent years. It involved 2 speech-to-text interpreters who were typing the notes the entire time, Sheila and Yuki on your right. Next, we have 5 sign language interpreters. We have Zhi Xiong here, who was interpreting for Alvan. We have Clara and Azam on stage interpreting for audience. And at the back of the room, if you did not notice, we have Evelyn and Fadiah interpreting for our live stream audience as well. So 5 in total. And the entire team, serving you, greeting you from level 1 to here is the entire Ethos Books and Page Shutters team. All 14 plus 2, even our partners are here to help us. There's 16 of us. So in total, I think we have 23 people actually today working on the launch to make it successful. So I really appreciate that from everyone. So I think to recognize that 23 people had to come together to get today, plus our panelists, right? I think you have to think about how inclusivity and accessibility is something that to aspire towards is one thing, but to make it a reality, I think we have to recognize the time and labor behind it and the cost as well. So the only reason Ethos Books was able to do this today is because of our membership program, which we started in December last year. And it's because of our members in December who, support us that we were actually able to have the cost to set everything up. So I think I'm here to just let you know that we really appreciate, support from yourselves, your friends and family if you think that, if you like to continue supporting our publishing work and allowing us to continue to make all our conversations accessible. Not just the one about disability, but even, general literary topics. We would like to make them as accessible as possible. So if you like to learn more about the membership, you can actually learn from BN and Glenn, who is on your left. You can purchase books over there as well as purchase the membership. And I think my last thing is to request our our book contributors to come up for a group photo. So for the rest of you, don't be too fast to talk to them. Let the book contributors come up and take a photo to remember the occasion before you break off. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon. Yes. So bye-bye to the live stream.